Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you guys know about an opportunity to learn some of the most important skills in life, if not the most important skills. And those are the skills of learning and doing so rapidly, effectively, and easily. You see, guys, I'm putting on a completely free 60-minute webinar that you guys can check out, where I will be going into my absolute best memory tips, learning tips, and speed reading tips so that you can immediately begin applying them and accelerating your learning of anything and everything. All you need to do to claim your spot in this free webinar is visit jle.vi/webinar. We have showings at many different times throughout the days for every time zone, but you have to log in and claim your spot. So that's jle.vi/webinar. And I really look forward to seeing what you guys achieve. This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You guys, one of the only things that every nutritional expert that we've had on the show seems to actually agree on is that we all need to eat more vegetables, eat more greens, eat organic, cut out all the processed junk. Well, who has the time, right? Who has the time to go out, do the shopping, make the salads, make the juices, make the smoothies? And that's what I love so much about Organifi. Their product is an all-organic green juice. It has all of the nutrients that you need. It tastes absolutely amazing, and it's made by wonderful people who I consider to be personal friends. And as listeners of this show, you guys can actually save 20% on your first order. And all you have to do is go to Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use the coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. Today's episode was made possible thanks to an amazing review from Rayo LA in Mexico, who says, "Pum, right on my face, 5 stars. I've listened to almost every podcast of your show, and this one hit me right on the face. With this punch in the online courses, I'm taking action now, starting with this review, my second one. Please keep doing it. Thank you and your team, Jonathan. Since your content has shown up in my life, everything has changed for the good. Muchas gracias again, all the way from Cancun, Mexico." Well, thank you very much, Rayo. I really, really appreciate that. I'm not actually sure which episode you were talking about because reviews show in for the whole channel, but I'm really, really glad that it, quote, hit you right in the face. I hope in a good way. On to today's episode. You guys, today we are joined by Max Hertan. He is a serial learner. So basically, here's his story. He built up an award-winning 7-figure digital marketing agency, Megaphone, and started investing in startups. But along the way, he, like me, started wondering, like, hey, what do I get to learn? And how do I get to learn new things as a grown-up adult? So he started a whole new YouTube channel, Max's Monthly Challenges, where he tackles a new challenge every single month, from learning backflips to salsa dancing, skateboarding, meditation, bodybuilding, and a whole hell of a lot more. Right now, he is working on learning Spanish in 1 month. And so we talked, we connected, we shared notes, and we started to understand what he has learned by learning. And learning how to learn. I think my big takeaway for this episode was really just the value, the inherent value of learning for learning's sake. But as you'll find out, Max also has some really, really interesting points to share about how you can become a better learner. So without any further ado, my new super friend, Mr. Max Hertan. Mr. Max Hertan, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been loving checking out your YouTube channel. So I'm really excited to hear a little behind the scenes today and share experiences with a fellow learning enthusiast.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. I'm definitely ready to share anything that I can that'll be interesting.
Awesome. So Max, for our audience, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, but also how did you get into this? How did you get into the enviable position of making learning your job?
Yeah, so I guess my background is after university, I was a little bit kind of disillusioned by the options of different careers and different jobs, and walking around a career fair, I'm like, nothing really suits me and what I'm interested in. So I ended up starting my own business, which was a marketing agency. And over the last 6 years, we built it to a team of 18 people. And I've deep dived into all types of learning when it comes to business, hiring, sales, marketing, Facebook ads, all of these things. But I built up enough time where I can now start focusing on building a personal brand that I can actually do something more interesting with, that can help my company, but also can help my passion for learning. And so I started a YouTube channel about a year ago where every month I do a different learning challenge, where it's been things like learning how to skateboard or salsa dance or learn Spanish or learn how to backflip or meditation every day for a month. And I get to deep dive. I get to connect with some of the best experts that I can find from around the world, and then hopefully create some entertaining, useful content out of it. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today.
Awesome. So the first and I guess most obvious question I have is, I have a end that I'm going to and an interest in this specifically. As you learn these things, are you going about learning how to learn them, or are you tackling it and coming up with new strategies? I mean, you and I did a podcast interview prior, and I guess what I wanted to ask is, did you go into this knowing that you were going to try and hack your learning?
Yeah, I guess I figured that I was going to get good at learning by trial by the fire. So I came in with what I thought was a reasonable approach. And I've always kind of had a passion for learning. And I've learned a lot of things before these challenges, whether it was, video games or musical instruments. But I guess I thought I'd figure things out along the way. And I probably underestimated my ability to do so originally. And I think as I've come along, I've definitely gotten better at cutting through some of the distractions in my learning challenges and focusing on what's actually going to be most beneficial. But of course, I still am learning in that process of learning, because each skill has unique challenges, and it's sometimes hard to predict where you want to be focusing your efforts on when you don't even have a base understanding of how to break down a skill. So there's a lot to learn, but I've definitely learned a lot about learning.
Wow. Any experiments in mnemonics, mnemonic techniques, speed reading, anything like that?
So I haven't done speed reading. I don't know if the challenges have called for that too much, but right now I'm learning Spanish. So one of my goals with Spanish is to get somewhere around 500 to 1,000 words of vocab by the end of the month, as well as trying to learn grammar. And I am doing a little bit of mnemonics, trying to break down the word and see if that word reminds me of other things, doing some listening, looking at visuals as well, while I'm using Anki, which is one of those SRS apps. You probably know more about that than me. And yeah, I guess that's kind of the full extent of some of the mnemonics that I've been doing. But I'd say this is the first challenge where it's been more about some of those kind of core learning lessons that you would apply to more knowledgeable things, as opposed to physical practice and other types of ideas.
Yeah. I mean, we talk in our programs about physical skills and how you can accelerate the learning of them. And I've really experimented with it, in Olympic weightlifting, acro yoga, all kinds of different physical skills. But you're right. The actual memory techniques, like the memory palace and things like that, they're really going to be most powerful for things that mostly happen in your head.
Totally.
So first off, we should work together on your Spanish. I'd be happy to help you, and I bet you we could get you to a point where you're learning about 50 new words a day.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we can do that offline. We can do another episode for your show or something like that. I want to ask you, what's been the most difficult thing that you've learned along the way?
So it's kind of surprising, I guess, to me, on what I would have predicted would be the most difficult. But I found stand-up comedy very challenging for a variety of reasons. So the biggest one being that with all these challenges, skateboarding, I jump on a skateboard, I can get a lot of deliberate practice. I can get feedback from a coach. The same with backflips, the same with juggling, the same with drawing. I can have a look at my drawing. But with stand-up comedy, it's very hard to recreate a situation where you can truly test whether a joke or an idea is funny. So you really need to be getting a lot of stage time. And stage time is a really difficult thing to get. You might have to take 5 hours signing up for an open mic night, waiting around to get 5 minutes of practice. And then you've written these ideas that you think are funny, and maybe your mood's not right and you didn't perform it well enough, and you didn't actually even get the feedback that you needed. So I found that process very challenging. And then also stacking on top of that, the nerves of public speaking, which is not necessarily something that I, focus on or are natural at. So I found that quite challenging, but I was also very rewarding as well. So that was pretty tough. And then I'd also say that this challenge that I'm doing right now, learning Spanish, is probably the most optimistic challenge that I've done to date. This is my first language that I've learned other than English. And learning all these grammatical rules and, male words and female words. And these are all new ideas for me. So it's definitely a lot to learn. And I'm obviously not going to be nailing the language by the end of the month, but my goal is to get to a base level of comprehension and conversational skills so that I can actually enjoy speaking in the language.
In 1 month.
In 1 month.
We probably should have spoken weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I want to extrapolate a really valuable point that you shared around the comedy thing, which is, I don't think we acknowledge, because in most learning challenges, it's kind of built in and baked in. And we don't even talk about this kind of thing in our program. It's built in and baked in that you have a feedback mechanism. We have some content about how to avoid giving yourself false positives, like, oh yeah, I knew that. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, I knew that, after the fact, when in fact you wouldn't have been able to pick it out of a lineup. But I think it's really interesting what you said about, as we are learning new things, we need to make sure that it's something where we're going to be getting feedback, right? The example I give in my business, when I'm speaking to an employee or a staff member, and they do something that isn't quite exactly what I want, there's two ways to handle it, right? The new 1 Minute Manager has a great piece on this. It's stop in the moment and explain, versus waiting till the end of the month or the end of the quarter and explaining. And the difference, as it was explained to me years ago in the Entrepreneurs Organization, was, if you are counting on someone to bowl a perfect game, do you want them to bowl with the lights on and constantly get feedback on how their performance is? Or do you want them to bowl an entire game and then at the end you tell them how they did by turning on the lights, right? And so, there's different variants of that. You can turn on the lights after they bowl each time. You can keep the lights on, which is giving them constant feedback. But it's kind of like, I always say in my team, like, I don't want you bowling in the dark. And I think that's what you're saying here, is like, you get only a few shots, and on some level, you're bowling in the dark.
Totally. And so, I had comedic coaches and I had friends. My friends would have heard my jokes 50 times and different variants, but that's not a true audience. And you're right. Without feedback, it's very hard to gauge if you're improving or if what you're doing is working. And particularly in something as subjective as a comedy, you need to actually perform it. With so many of the other skills, even whether or not I'm meditating better, I could use a brain scanning device, and I had this thing that could track my brain waves, so I could at least get some objective measure to get some feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway for the audience, is as you are learning things, make sure that you have feedback mechanisms to objectively assess your performance. Because meditation, by the way, is another phenomenal example of, like, I think I did it. I mean, part of the time I was thinking about my breath or my mantra, but it's really nice to have that objective feedback. It's the same with Olympic weightlifting, right? Like, once the weight is moved, unless someone's watching you or you filmed yourself, you have no idea what path the weights took. Did it go straight? Did you make a curve? Did you stop at a certain point? And so it's super important to have that objective feedback.
Totally.
I wanted to ask you, Muse was kind enough to just send me a brain sensing headband in anticipation of an interview coming up. But which headband are you using to track meditation?
I was using the Muse.
How do you like it?
I liked it. I think it suits a personality like mine. So feedback is something that's very important to me, and progression is very important to me. And I know that that's somewhat counterintuitive for something like meditation, which is being present and being relaxed with your environment. But still, I can still have that presence and be relaxed. But having that feedback allows me to be excited about that journey and be more motivated. And to put some numbers on it, my first meditation or my first couple, I was only doing 5 minutes, and I was only calm about 25% of the time. And then by the end, I could do 10 minutes where I was calm over 90% of the time.
Wow.
And the difference that I felt through those different meditations was night and day, the way that I experienced the meditation and what was actually going on in my head. And I could actually work through a logical thought pattern to figure out what is the difference. Because it wasn't like my mind was fully shut off either time, but one, it was more, there was just no control element to it when I could get the muse to see that I was relaxed. But I know a lot of other people find, meditation something like the muse wouldn't suit the way that they would like to practice.
Right. I'm really excited to have mine in the mail and also to talk to their team and have them on the show just to see what we can learn from it. What has been the easiest thing, surprisingly easy thing that you have learned and why?
That's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me what the easiest is. Let me think. The drawing one was interesting. It was one of my first few challenges, and I've always enjoyed drawing in my life, and I wasn't a terrible drawer, and I originally drew a portrait of myself, and I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good. And then if you compare my first drawing that I drew on day 1 to the drawing that I finished on day 30, the first one looks like, the equivalent of a stick figure, and the last one looks like a photo. The difference is so night and day. And what was interesting about that is it was not like I technically got better in terms of the motor skills of my hand or, my ability to, see something and recreate it. It was more learning techniques that were very easily learned. And so having a set process of knowing how to triangulate the shape of the face, and then knowing how to start with the darker shades and then start with the lighter shades and work to find the middle shades. And even just the different tools that we used, like a smudging pencil and a graphite, different kind of tools that you'd use. I was really blown away with how good that final image was. And it wasn't necessarily challenging. I would definitely feel like anyone that went through that same process would have a really good result as well.
I think, once again, that's a super interesting example because drawing is one of those things that people tend to have what I call a psychological golem effect around, where they just say, oh, I'm a terrible drawer. I'm a terrible dancer. Well, in some things, people treat it as fixed, and some people treat it as, I just have never, right? So it's like you would never, certain things you would never say, I'm just bad at that, right? That if you invested the skill, but for some reason people think about drawing an artistic skill and they just assume I am not that kind of person, but it's a skill like any other, right? It's like public speaking, right? Or speaking in general. You would never say, I'm really, really bad at Spanish. You would say, I don't yet know Spanish.
Totally.
Right? And yet drawing is such a different thing. So I think that's a really, really interesting example. How did you go about learning? What was your process for learning to draw?
So I did a course online. So I think it was called Virtuin Studio. And it was this online course. It was about 13, 14 hours where a guy goes through a portrait drawing step by step and gives you very specific instructions along the way. And so while I was learning and while I was watching the course, I was also drawing at the same time. And so I'd stop, I'd watch, and then I'd draw alongside with him. And I just found that process to be really good. And I drew 3 portraits for the month. And I needed to do 3 because the first 2, I drew Elon Musk and I drew Beyonce beforehand, and they both turned out a little bit wonky. And I realized the mistakes that I made. And so when I did the final self-portrait, I'd got a lot of feedback, I guess, from those earlier mistakes. And the last one, for me and what my expectations are about what I was going to draw, it definitely was way ahead of what I thought I could do.
Wow, that's really interesting. I might just copy that challenge and try it myself because it's one of those fanciful skills that maybe is not practical in the workplace, but I think would add a lot of joy in my life to be able to just sit there and draw and doodle. And this kind of leads into our next question, which is I've kind of learned that anything I learn is going to have applicability outside the field of study. So when I learned Olympic weightlifting, it was about becoming stronger and fixing, imbalances in muscles. But then when I went to learn acro yoga, it was like night and day how much quicker I could learn it because I had all these ideas about movement and kinesiology and transfer of weight. So have you found that as well with the things that you've been learning, say drawing or backflips, that you're just like, oh, this is just like this. And the more you learn, the more fluently you're able to learn?
Definitely. So it's been really interesting seeing my evolution in learning. So I can definitely make a parallel. So I might be trying to do a backflip and I'm trying to think of some of my more recent challenges, but I can definitely correlate an individual experience like dropping in on a half pipe might be, I'll think about the progressions that I used in skateboarding. And so how I did it originally on a slight ramp and then a bigger ramp. And then I did it with my coach holding me with both hands and then one hand. And then when I'm thinking about my backflip, then I try to figure out what's my progression. So I start on a mat and then I go onto a trampoline and then a lower bouncy trampoline and trying to understand, that progression. Like, because I've overcome a fear in that process. And so I know that I have a set procedure to do that same thing. And so there's a lot of like weird parallels as well, where even when the skills don't seem to necessarily match, I know that I can parallel and go, no, I need to do this. And I know that this will help me get to that next kind of breakthrough moment.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. Do you have any other examples off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
There's so many that it's kind of hard to think, but I'm trying to think about what I'm doing right now. I guess right now I'm learning Spanish, and one thing I'm trying to think about is kind of closer to the 80-20 rule of learning. So there's so much when you're learning a new language, and there's so many different tenses and things like that. And so really trying to cut through to find what is the core of what I should be learning and what do I want to be talking about at the end, and trying to get through to what's actually interesting and most relevant for me. So when it might be doing something like meditation, which, they don't necessarily parallel, I'll be like, what are the core concepts that I can stack on one by one so that I'm not stacking on too much in my meditation? And that way I can get to where I want to be by the end of the month, which is showing that improvement with the Muse headband. And I really think that's just the most recent one, but that seems to kind of hold true. All of these, there's so many just individual principles that seem to be almost universal.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really, really love that. All right. At this point, I want to pause and take a moment to thank our sponsor, Four Sigmatic, who is making it easy for everyday people to unlock the incredible health benefits of mushrooms. I originally learned about Four Sigmatic when I met their founder at a conference in 2015, and I have been pretty much obsessed with their products ever since. Personally, I use their reishi mushroom tea most nights for an all-natural sleep aid. I carry their chaga immunity blend anytime I travel. And I've also pretty much switched out my usual coffee or yerba mate for their unbelievably awesome mushroom coffee, either in ground or in instant form. Now, what I love about the mushroom coffee is that it combines chaga for immune support with lion's mane for intense focus. And because of that, I actually find it to be more effective than most nootropics or stimulants, including Ritalin, despite having only 40 milligrams of caffeine. It's honestly insane. If you haven't tried out their products, I strongly, strongly recommend you do so. And to encourage you to give them a try, we've actually teamed up with Four Sigmatic to bring you an incredible 15% discount. To take advantage of that, just visit foursigmatic.com/superhuman today. All right, back to the show. What do you think your next learning challenges are going to be? And I guess we'll get into the follow-up question, but the follow-up question is kind of, how are you going to take them on differently than you would have if you'd taken them on in the beginning, in a sense?
Cool.
To get an idea of your progress as a learner.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So next month, this is my 12th challenge currently. So next month, I'm going to do a review month. So I'm going to go over all 12 challenges again, review them, see how my current skill level is at, see the regression or how long it takes me to get back that skill.
Spaced repetition. I love it.
Yeah. So that should be fun. And then I'm planning out my next year of challenges. So some of the things on the list, I want to DJ or make some electronic music production and DJ at a club. I want to build something. It might be like something physical, like some drawers, maybe even do a clothes making thing where I try to make a suit or a shirt. What are some of the other ones? I want to speed run a video game. There's a whole list. I wanted to do the splits. And I have no idea how difficult these things are. And I also loosely have a connection to the world champion in speed cubing. He's actually in Melbourne and lives not too far away from me.
Speed cubing.
Speed Rubik's cubing. Yeah. And so I think his world record is like 4 seconds. He can solve a Rubik's cube. And so hopefully we're going to do an episode together where he can teach me how to speed solve a Rubik's Cube. I don't know what a reasonable time is, maybe under 30 seconds or under a minute. but I thought that could be a fun one too. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas hopefully coming up for the channel, which it's fun. It's exciting.
That's awesome. And how are you choosing these challenges? Is it just you see what folks are doing that excites and inspires you and go for it?
Yeah, I'd say there's like an intersection of what interests me and what I think is interesting. And so I try to have a balance of like fun, less useful things like juggling 5 balls, for example, mixed with more practical skills like building a $1,000 a month business or meditation. I did a 90-day bodybuilding challenge. So I try to find a balance of purely fun and then some more practical. And then also, yeah, just what's interesting to me. I love the idea of becoming a man of many talents or a man of many interests. And now when I watch skateboarding, I have a higher appreciation of it. I really enjoy it after having done that challenge. That's really impressive to me now because I understand the difficulty involved with that. Yeah, there's a lot of things making those decisions, I guess.
Right. I wanted to say I admire you for not choosing just the academic or business or practical skills. I mean, it would be very easy as someone who runs a marketing agency to sit down and be like, okay, well, I'm going to learn video editing because that's, something I want to understand, or I'm going to learn bookkeeping, or all these different practical skills that you could use in your business. But I think it's really cool that you're doing all kinds of physical skills. I'd love to see you. I mean, Spanish is a good one. Spanish is a great starter language. It was my 3rd language and it's easier than the other 3 that I speak. I'd love to see you do some musical instrument stuff because that has completely unlocked new levels of thought. And it's just been remarkable to me how much more I can learn from the piano and how many leaps and bounds I need to go into learning whole new thought structures, which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I actually grew up playing piano. So
okay. So you're all set.
Well, yeah, I just played a lot of piano before, but I was thinking one thing that I've never been able to do is improvise. And so I was thinking a good challenge for me might be doing some blues improvisation, either on a piano or a guitar, and just learning how to put on a backing track and just kind of vibe and flow. I thought that could be something fun to do.
Awesome. So Max, what would you say to our audience? What would be a nice piece of homework that you'd like to give them around learning? And well, I keep getting ahead of myself with too many questions. So what would be a nice piece of homework that you'd like to assign?
I guess for me, I'd say there's a couple of things. There's the more philosophical approach that I often think about with myself, which is like defining a really strong why and having a really strong foundation of motivation.
So important.
Yeah. For me, I've really connected this learning challenge to something with a higher purpose. I really want to build a personal brand that I can leverage to do something good for the world. That's really exciting and fun for me. And so when I wake up and it's 7 a.m. and I got to do an hour of Spanish, it's pretty hard to have that discipline when you don't necessarily know, or you kind of think it's right or interesting, but you don't fully commit to that idea, or you haven't really built that in your mind. So I think defining those ideas in your head is super valuable. Mm-hmm. And then I guess if it is something that you're interested in learning, or there's some skill, other than obviously listening to the Becoming Superhuman podcast and learning a lot of these skills is super valuable. I'd also say looking at getting a mentor or someone that you can actually leverage in your life that gives you feedback, that gives you challenges, that gives you homework as well for the specific things that you're looking for. And a lot of the time, they're a lot more accessible than you think. And they don't have to be the expert. They just have to be someone ahead of where you are currently at.
That's such an important point, Max. And something that in the early years, the whole super learner thing had a connotation of autodidactism associated with it, that it was like, you sit in a room by yourself and you power through subjects and you learn them by yourself. And if anything has changed, I mean, a lot of things have changed as we've developed and worked with more and more students. But one major thing that I've changed in my own learning repertoire is leveraging coaches. And you see it in our newer materials that I talk about Socratic method and how you can kind of ask the right questions and how to extract knowledge the most efficient way from a coach or a mentor. To be honest with you, a large part of it is actually not even around learning speed. It's around motivation. Like I read Gretchen Rubin's book, Better Than Before, and she talked about that some people are satisficers, meaning I won't get out of bed at 7 a.m. for myself, but if I have a call with a coaching client or I have a piano lesson, I will definitely get out of bed and I will do it. And the same goes for Russian lessons. Like, I probably wouldn't take half of Tuesday off to just study Russian by myself. But when I know that I've not only paid, but I have a tutor waiting for me on Tuesdays, I will do it. And I think that's a large part of the value that people neglect, is like the social pressure of it, and not wanting to let someone else down is just a huge motivator for me, at least. I know different people are different, but
yeah, I mean, for me too. One of the things that I do to force myself to learn is, when I'm learning Spanish, I can go and sign up to Baseline, where you can get unlimited Spanish tutoring. And then I can just schedule in times where I know I'm going to be forced to do Spanish because I've already booked in a lesson, and I don't want to be rude to that person and miss the lesson. And so, or, with skateboarding, having the coach or whatever it is, those people and not wanting to let them down is really important to me. And then also there's the other thing is, for you learning Russian, what is that actually going to build in your life? You're creating this person that speaks so many languages and that's done so many difficult things. And so it's not just about, learning another language. Is this really that important? Do I really need to learn this language? It's about attaching that to a higher purpose and the value of being that type of, or living true to that type of identity. I think that's so valuable when you have that kind of knowledge.
Right. I think I heard you say something that I really liked. You said creating this type of person. I really love that. And I just wrote a post about it that's going to come out on the podcast soon or later, before or after this. I'm not sure. But it's about this idea that keeps coming up again and again and again on the podcast, that you don't just learn and emulate the skills of the people who have the things you want to have and do the things you want to do. You have to actually become that person. You can't just fake the funk. Like, if I start walking around and doing the things that Elon Musk does, that doesn't make me Elon Musk. I need to first become the type of person who naturally does those things and has that level of success and clarity in their life. I think that's a really interesting point that you kind of made there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So, Max, final thing I wanted to ask, what has been, as you go along on this journey, what has been kind of some of the big takeaways for you about learning, about life, about what you want to do next?
So I guess about learning, I've touched on a lot of these things, but really trying to get to the 80-20 of the skill and really focusing on what's going to be most important as quickly as possible. Setting a good schedule or practice schedule is so important. So getting feedback really early on, and people that are good at a skill aren't necessarily good at a teacher, and it's much better to find a good teacher than a good doer. Deliberate practice, getting feedback, all of those things I just think are so important. Having that strong motivation. I really think that those kind of summarize some of my best learnings with learning. And then some of the things that I've got out of it, I guess, my enjoyment that I've had from so many different things. I love skateboarding. That's why it's one that I bring up a lot, because as a kid, I loved watching skateboarding. When I was 11, 12, I jumped on a skateboard and I was tall and awkward and not very flexible, and just figured it wasn't for me. Like you were talking about earlier, I just had this idea that, there wasn't a lot of tall skateboarders and everyone seemed to be able to jump high, and I just okay, well, maybe that's just not right for my body type. And then to come back and to do a kickflip and to ollie over an object and all these things that it did, that was super satisfying for me. And then another thing is just, the enjoyment that I've got about, there's that difficult period with every learning challenge. There's an excitement, then there's a difficult period, and then there's another excitement, like a breakthrough and more excitement. And really just getting through those difficult periods, because the excitement and the value of having all these things is just so satisfying for me.
Totally. And there's such an inherent value in learning just for learning's sake. I think that really exemplifies what we're trying to convince people of with all the work we do.
Totally.
Learning is an inherent good in and of itself.
Definitely agree.
Awesome. So Max, I want to be respectful of your time. How can people reach out and learn more about you? What can they check out? We'll obviously link to your YouTube channel, but where should we send people?
Yeah, so best place is the YouTube channel. So it's just Max Hertan, or Max's Monthly Challenge on YouTube. On Instagram, I'm Max Hertan, which is MaxHertan. I'd say those are probably the two best ways to reach out. If you've got any questions or suggestions for me for upcoming challenges, definitely reach out. I'd love to hear from you guys.
Awesome. And we will put all those links in the podcast episode. Max, last question I want to ask you is, if people take away really just one message from all your experience, what would you hope for that message to be?
Yeah. So I guess thinking about a takeaway from a philosophical standpoint, something that I've found really useful is this idea of first principle thinking, which is something that Elon Musk is a really big fan of. And it's really going down to the core of asking yourself why and breaking it down further and further. And so when I think about my life and why I'm actually living, for me, it's happiness. And I think happiness is a noble thing to desire, because within happiness, presumably you want to give back to the world. You want to be a good father, role model, whatever it is. And so defining your values, once you understand that you know why you want to live. And then for me, living in alignment with my values is happiness, and then defining those values. I think having that process can be really useful for a lot of people, maybe the people that think like me and are kind of more scientific and like to break everything down. I think really building those blocks to make decisions upon makes you make your decisions with a lot more conviction and gives you a lot more consistency and motivation to actually do the things that you want to do.
So important. I love that. Max Hertan, I want to thank you very much for spending your time with us today. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I can't wait to see your next YouTube video.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a pleasure chatting to you, and looking forward to learning some Spanish tips from you as well.
Let's do it. We'll reconnect.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
A pleasure. All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperhuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.